see, touch, and feel, they've all got an origin story, a certain point in time where it all began. And like everything else, we did too. A baby start, a humble beginning of the next big thing. It's been 5 years now, and we are no more just a beginning, just an origin story. And as we grow, we will always be grateful for the ones that guided us this far and for the one that will lead us to greater heights tomorrow. This is IIM at the origin. This is IIM Nagpur.
Building upon the past editions, Illume 5.0 seeks to harness the vast industry experience and further enhance the relationship between the industry and IIM Nagpur. Recent events over the past year have made evident the need for a strong leadership during times of crisis. And in keeping with this trend, the theme chosen for Illume 5.0 is leadership in crisis. After all, as the old adage goes, the true test of leadership is how well we function in a crisis.
सर मैं कॉल हाँ सर एक वीसी में हूँ
Let us begin with the welcome song by our batchmate, Ms. Shraddha Bhosle.
इंदु तुषार धवला वरदंड मंडित करा या श्वेत पद्मासना या ब्रह्माच्युत शंकरा प्रभृतिभिः देवै सदा वन्दिता सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निशेष चाड्यापहा शुक्लां ब्रह्म विचार सार परमा अद्यं जगद्व्यापिनी वीणा पुस्तकधारिणीं अभयदां जाड्यान्धकारापहां हस्ताटिक विदधर संस्थितां वन्दे तां परमेश्वरीं भगवतीं बुद्धिप्रदां Thank you.
Thank you, Shraddha, for mesmerizing us with that beautiful rendition of the Saraswati Vandanam. We would like to begin today with a small token of our appreciation and gratitude to the chief guest for today, Mr. Shiv Shivakumar, and our director, Dr. Bhimaraya Maitri. At IIM Nagpur, we strongly believe in creating a sustainable environment, and thus it is our tradition to present our guests with a unique living and breathing gift that reflects our ethos. Respected sirs, a tree has been planted on each of your behalves on the periphery of the Sundarbans forest in West Bengal as part of the Tree for Tigers program, and the certificate for the same will be mailed to you shortly. A very warm welcome to you, sirs. We will now have the director's address by Dr. Bhimaraya Maitri, Director, IIM Nagpur. Prior to joining IIM Nagpur, Dr. Maitri has served as the director, IIM Trichy, Following stints at the L&T Institute of Project Management, Vadodara, MDI Gurgaon, IMI New Delhi, and BITS Pilani. A PhD from IIT Powai, Dr. Maitri is serving as the chairperson of various national institutions, such as the All India Board of Management Studies, AICTE New Delhi, and the Innovation Committee of the Bureau of Indian Standards, amongst others. He is also a member of the prestigious Indian National Commission for Cooperation with UNESCO. I would like to kindly request Professor Bhimaraya Maitri, Director, IIM Nagpur, to inaugurate the event and share a few words of wisdom with us.
Very good morning, Chief. Sri Shiv Kumar ji, ladies and gentlemen, extremely happy today of Illume 5. We are 2015. I am Nagpur achieved number of marks. Today new campus is coming in Mihar, which is kind in India, special economic. Part of it is going to be located, and we are going to move June 20 to the new. Almost hostels are ready. Is going to be ready March, and entire campus is going to be ready, and we are going to move on June 18, 2021. So the uniqueness of IIM Nagpur is, since it is surrounded by the variety of companies, right from pharmaceutical company to spare parts of Boeing and Mahindra Tech, SCL, TCS, and many more companies. So it is a great opportunity for IIM Nagpur to get the industry leaders into the classrooms, and IIM Nagpur will produce a future leaders to take up the roles in unborn companies. I must say that we are extremely lucky to have our chief guest, Sri Shiv Kumar ji, and Shiv Kumar ji is a well-known corporate leader. I know 2005 days. I always take an opportunity when sir was in Gurgaon to invite MDI and address students. And I always say he is not only my mentor, but he is a leader of leaders. You know, we know many leaders, but he is the one person, he is leaders of leader. I have seen him as a president of IMA. I have seen him receiving award from International Management Association from China. So I have seen him, you know, bringing the reforms, many reforms in many areas, All India Management Association, and also companies wherever he worked, whether it is, you can talk about the first company, Nokia, or, this Pepsi, or currently Aditya Birla. So he is known as a transformation leader, he is known as a innovation leader, and also, and his speech is always appreciated, whether it is his address at IIM Trichy as a chief guest of convocation, and his address at 2018 at IIM Nagpur as a chief guest. I think every time you listen and you always learn. Probably rarest of rare people you may find, and we are lucky to have Shiv Kumar ji for today's function as a chief guest. I am sure insights, and particularly the topic which is very close to his heart, and he himself he is a transformation leader. I am sure we are going to learn a lot from this today's his address. And as far as topic is concerned, leadership in crisis, and all of you know that greatest crisis in the world today is a crisis of leadership itself. And it is in the times of crisis that good leaders emerge. So that is why people always say acid test for leader is a crisis. And leader can emerge, leader can stand up, and we have seen right from Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, or even many corporate world, the leaders emerge and they will position the companies and they will take it to the higher level. So leaders turn crisis into opportunities. Whether an organization dies, whether organization survives, or whether an organization thrives is greatly determined by the leader before, during, and after the crisis. Recently, you might have heard Amazon founder and chief executive Jeff told that I predict that 21st century is going to be Indian century. And I hope India has a greater opportunity and responsibility to provide global leadership to the world. And at this juncture, I would like to quote a definition given by our great saint Swami Vivekananda for leadership. So according to Swami Vivekananda, leader is the one who thinks the unthinkable, who achieves the unachievable, who sees the invisible. Such person is a leader. My dear students, you should always remember two things. One is education is the mother of leadership, and the most important one is readers are the leaders. The second important thing you have to remember, again, this Vivekananda, he said, arise till the goal is achieved. So thank you very much. Once again, I welcome our chief guest, Shiv Kumar ji, for this Illume 5.0 to address our students, and I welcome everybody, and I join Farid to proceed the next proceeding.
Thank you, sir, for those kind words. It is my honor and privilege to introduce our chief guest for Illume 5.0, the illustrious Mr. Shiv Shivakumar, Group Executive President for Corporate Strategy and Business Development, Aditya Birla Group. Prior to this, Mr. Shivkumar served as the chairman and CEO of PepsiCo India. He has also worked with Nokia as CEO for India and emerging markets for over a decade. He has been the chairman of the Mobile Marketing Association and the chairman of the Advertising Standards Council of India. He also serves on the board of directors of both XLRI and IIM Udaipur. The distinguished alumnus status was conferred upon Mr. Shivkumar by both IIT Madras and IIM Calcutta. He is an avid reader and regularly puts out his reading list as well as book reviews for his numerous followers on LinkedIn. IIM Nagpur is very glad to have you in our midst, sir. And now, without further ado, I would like to invite sir to grace us with his valuable insights.
Thank you, Farid, and thank you, Dr. Maitri. Can you put my first slide up, please? It's an absolute pleasure to be amongst the IIM Nagpur people. I know you're an institute which is in its 6th year of running, which itself is fantastic. Okay, you're one of the youngest institutes in the country. And I've known Dr. Maitri for a long time. He's a personal friend. And when he said, will you do this? I immediately said yes. I would do anything for Dr. Maitri. He's a wonderful human being. And I saw, I had not seen this before actually. When I came to you for the convocation in 80, I should have seen this then. Your IIM Nagpur symbol, the symbol design is a book, which is very representative of today's times. If you look at all the old IIM logos, they are all industrial, belts and wheels and things like that. And it's interesting that you have moved with the times, because today's world is about knowledge and insights. It's not about machines. And I think your logo captures that very well. I didn't recognize it till I actually saw that in your origin video. So thank you very much. I am Nagpur and this batch for having me here. It's an absolutely pleasure to do this session for you on a Sunday morning. So the topic given to me was leadership in a crisis. Okay, next slide, please. So what is a crisis is something that you would ask and you'd always wonder. In my book, a crisis is something that changes your equilibrium significantly, whatever that equilibrium definition is, either in your company or personally or as a team. You have a certain equilibrium, you have a certain rhythm, and that is upset. And that is what is a crisis in my book. That's all, as simple as that. You don't need to go into many more jargon or words for that. Okay, next slide, please. Now, the issue with leadership is that sometimes a crisis is brewing. You know that. Like, for example, I'm sure everybody knew that a crisis is brewing on e-commerce, all the physical distribution companies, etc. But they didn't wake up to it. All the FMCG companies didn't wake up to it. I've been urging them over the last 6 years to wake up to it. They just haven't. So that's a crisis which was brewing. Today, 12% of FMCG sales is accounted for by e-commerce. If that's not a crisis, I don't know what is. Second, sometimes you inherit a crisis. So when you take over as a leader, you inherit a crisis. Something's gone wrong. You've been appointed there. Company has no profitability. You need to pull it back to profitability. Or company morale is low. You need to pull it back. Company's gone through a bad recall, whatever it is. Sometimes you inherit a crisis. And that's the job of leadership, to inherit a crisis and solve it. And sometimes it comes out of left field. You don't expect it at all. And suddenly the crisis is in front of you. You might have 1 minute to resolve it. You might have 1 year to resolve it. You might have 1 decade to resolve it. But you need to resolve it. So a crisis is not something that you plan for. I don't think any leader plans for a crisis. And most leaders don't want a crisis on their hands. Everybody wants to run a smooth machine. So crisis, sometimes it's happening under your watch. Sometimes you inherit it. And sometimes it just comes out of left field. And I'll talk about these. Next chart, please. I have 6 examples of crisis leadership. People who looked at the situation and said, hey, you know what? We are in a crisis. The equilibrium is disturbed or going to be disturbed. And we need to do something about it and come out of it successfully. I've given you 6 examples in the coming pages. And then I have 1 slide of my own personal examples. And then I'll do a quick summary. That's what I'm going to do. Next slide, please. The first crisis, I would say, and this is pertinent to all of you in India, is the 1991 crisis, when India nearly defaulted. Our Prime Minister then was Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, leading a coalition government, one of the first coalition governments in the country, etc. Now, this might have been brewing for quite some time, thanks to our policies of the past or whatever it is. He assembled a great team under him, including a future Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, etc. And they looked at the situation and said, India has no choice but to liberalize and be part of the world economy. Okay, and that's exactly what they did. They hawked the gold, okay, and got some relief on the loan. So we didn't, go into a debt crisis. We didn't default. And after that, we've seen a dramatically new India. So it's taken 30 years. But the crisis and cometh the man. And that's exactly what happened with, Mr. Narasimha Rao. Same thing happened with Deng Xiaoping in China in the 1970s. He did exactly the same. He recognized that China had to look outwards and not inwards. So you could well say that, Mr. Narasimha Rao was part of many cabinets. He must have seen it coming. But that advantage of having seen it coming and then taking decisive action is where India has benefited. Today, each and every one of you and my generation specifically, we owe a lot of our, living standard, etc., to the team which, Mr. Narasimha Rao led. But for those reforms, India would not be a top 10 economy today, by no stretch of imagination. So cometh the crisis, cometh the man. It was a significant moment, and he did everything right for the country. Next slide, please. This is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs started or founded Apple along with Wozniak. Then he bought in Scully from PepsiCo. And then the board and Scully decided that Steve Jobs was too toxic person to run or be in Apple. So they removed him from his role. He went away to Next, etc. Then he came back to Apple around 2000 because Apple was floundering. When he came back to Apple, he recognized that just running PCs was not going to be it. And systematically, he looked at about 5-6 industries and said, we need to disrupt that. And that's the only way Apple can move forward. He could well have said, I have a business which is $500 million, let me take it to 600, etc. But he didn't do that. He said, look, we need some absolute blockbuster, transformational products. So whether it was the iPod, whether it was the iPhone, okay, iPad, each and every one of them. And of course, later on the watch, etc. iTunes, fundamental changes in 6 industries. That's what they brought about. So Apple's been in business since 1970s, okay? But it required for them to wake up, after nearly 30 years to say, hey, we need to be a transformational company. And they were in a crisis at that point of time. They had, when Steve Jobs was CEO in 2000, they had money in the bank to pay 2 weeks' salaries. That's it. Steve Jobs went, got a soft loan or an investment from Bill Gates, and that's how the company survived. And today, Apple is a company with a market cap of $2 trillion, $2.2 trillion. And imagine, less than 20 years ago, they were 2 weeks away from bankruptcy. Okay? Is that a crisis? Almost a crisis. But one step at a time, one new product at a time, and then they came out of the crisis. Next chart, please. This is Gene Kranz, still alive, 1933. He was born in 1933, of NASA. He was the manager or the project manager of both the Gemini missions and the Apollo missions. He was a personal friend of many an astronaut who took off on those missions in Apollo. Gene Kranz, there's a famous movie, Apollo 13. He was the project manager when they got a call from Apollo 13 saying, Houston, we have a problem. Gene Kranz assembled 250 of his program managers in NASA, and he said, failure is not an option. It's one of the most famous statements ever made in history. Failure is not an option. And then he defined what success was. He said success is bringing back Apollo 13 to Mother Earth safely and all 3 astronauts alive. He said, that is my definition of success. Now, can we all work towards that? He cobbled everybody together and then did that. He was also very famous for a very famous expression, which I really like. He said, good leaders are tough but competent. A lot of poor leaders are tough and incompetent. Okay, but he was the first person to express that sentence, tough and competent leadership. And Gene Kranz actually delivered on that. He was very famous in the days of fashion today, which we talk about. He used to wear these vests, which were designed by his wife, Mary. Okay, she actually stitched them for him, and he would wear them every day on the NASA, in the NASA office. So long story short, Apollo 13 came back, all 3 were safe, etc. But it required enormous coordination. It required that you were in a crisis. And it was not about, just saying, let it come back. He wanted all 3 alive. And that was the crisis that Gene Kranz saw in front of him. And he overcame that with some outstanding leadership. Next slide, please. This is what I call left field. And this movie is there, Sully. You should see it. I've read the book, Sully Sullenberger. This is Captain Sully Sullenberger, 2009. Flight 1549 is piloting that. And 60 seconds into the flight, a bunch of Canadian geese hit his 2 engines. The A320 plane is flying, and both engines collapse. No pilot ever, goes through a crisis like that, where both engines collapse. Your plane can break down, anything can happen. Both engines collapse. Then he takes a left turn, and he's thinking, there's an airport called Teterboro. Can I go there? He tells the New York, ATC that, look, I've lost both engines. Okay, I need help. So the guy says, okay, come back into New York. We'll clear this runway for you. While turning back, he recognizes that he cannot go back into New York. He cannot try that because he doesn't have, enough glide power. Okay, at the height he is, he cannot glide through. He knows that he's going to be shot. He considers Teterboro. He says that's also too far. And finally, he decides to land in water on the Hudson River. Now, when he is below a particular height, the ATC loses track of him. So the ATC thinks that flight 1549, captained by Sully, has crashed. Okay, and he's holding his hand saying, my God, I've got 100 people dying there. Sully Sullenberger lands the plane in water. When he's landing the plane in water, and here's an important component of basic learning and knowledge, he remembers that when he was a trainee pilot, his trainer told him, if you ever had to land in water, come in at some 7 degrees or 8 degrees, that's the perfect, and you can keep the plane afloat on water. So while he's coming through in the last 10 seconds, his whole focus is on keeping the plane at that angle, that 7 or 8 degrees or 17 degrees, and saying, let me land it properly there. That's all. Forget everything else. He lands it properly, saves all 100 plus people on board, checks the plane in and out, and then walks away. Everybody is safe. Now that's a crisis of a very different order. Within 60 seconds, both your engines are off. You need to think very sharply, very clearly, very quickly, because lives are at stake. And you have nowhere to land. Imagining landing on water. No pilot is ever trained to land on water. Okay, so that's an absolutely unimaginable situation, absolutely from left field. But Sullenberger was then given the Medal of Honor by the US president. Okay, he wrote a famous book, and of course the movie was made very famous. Okay, if you've not seen the movie, please do see it today itself. It's called Sully, and it's an absolutely fantastic movie in terms of what a leader goes through in a crisis. Next slide, please. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, Manchester United is one of my favorite teams. Okay, and I follow both Man United and Barcelona. I ended up following Barcelona because in Nokia we ended up doing a sponsorship with them, and then I went to Nou Camp. I saw the wonderful facilities, and I fell in love with Barca also. Now, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer came into Manchester United in 2019 because they're having a crisis. The previous 2-3 managers had been sacked after 26 years of Alex Ferguson. Okay, and Ole Gunnar was an ex-Manchester United player, a celebrated player. He had to slowly rebuild the team, and that's exactly what he's done over the last 2 years. Today, they're sitting in second place in the league, okay, with 42 points or whatever it is. And his job is to get Manchester United back on track and regain the old glory. Okay, he is in the process of rebuilding. He has recognized that he has a crisis on hand. He has to get the right people on the team. He has to ensure that things go well. And his fans and everybody else will expect nothing less than trophies for him to be successful. Okay, so that's a crisis he inherited. He knew what he was getting into. It was not that he landed up in the job and said, hey, suddenly things have gone wrong. Not at all. He knew that he was getting into a tough situation. He was actually made an interim, manager, and they confirmed him much later. In fact, one of the things you should know is why everything is called iPad, iPhone, this thing, etc. When Steve Jobs was called back to lead Apple, he was told he was the interim CEO. And as a joke on that, that's why the I. So he used to go around with a visiting card which said CEO, interim CEO. And that's why he decided to name all the products, iPad, iPhone, etc. something, okay, interim. Okay, that's the backstory on that. So Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is on his way. Okay, nothing less than success would be expected of him. He knew that he was inheriting a crisis. He knew that he had to sort it out, and he knew that he doesn't have much time. If he does not deliver something tangible this year, I don't think he will be the manager next year. But that's the price you pay for inheriting that kind of a job. Next slide, please. This is a recent story. Kevin Johnson, CEO of Starbucks. 2 colored people were arrested in a Starbucks shop, okay, in a Starbucks coffee outlet by police. And there was an absolute outrage across the country saying, how can Starbucks allow it? And those 2 people were actually innocent, and they didn't do anything. The police just were trigger happy. So now there was a huge backlash in social media against Starbucks for what had happened. And Kevin Johnson, who was the CEO, took a very bold call. This is a crisis, right? It just blows up in front of you and you never expect it because you are serving coffee and somebody gets arrested on your campus. Is not your problem, right? But he did something smart. He went on television, he went everywhere and publicly apologized for what had happened. He said, we are really sorry, a Starbucks family, that this has happened on our premises, okay, and this is not right. I'm really sorry, okay, number 1. And he said, look, this requires, some degree of coaching and counseling for all our store managers on how to deal with racial inequality, ethnicity, etc. And as a result, he said, we are closing all Starbucks shops across the country in America for half a day because we're going to train all our people. We're going to train all our people how to handle the situation. So you will not get your favorite coffee for half a day, but this is the right thing for us to do. Okay, did that, trained everybody. It's not that it's going to solve all the problems, but today Starbucks is in a better place. Again, a crisis from left field. You never expect it, right? Suddenly, 2 people getting arrested, etc. Starbucks got a lot of positive momentum as the result of Kevin Johnson's outstanding leadership. Okay, so that's what it is. Next slide, please. I want to give you 3 simple stories from my career. Unilever, when I was a brand manager, I used to report to 2 managers, which are staff. Both were senior managers. They couldn't get along with each other, and each of them was telling me to work extra hard for him or her. One of the guys one day was traveling to Calcutta. He fired me in front of the agency and said, "You're not doing a good job. The agency is making mistakes. You're supposed to protect me from these goons in the agency." He said, "After I reach Calcutta, I'm going to call the director and tell him that you're no good and you should be transferred." Yeah, huge crisis, right? I walked back to the other manager's office whom I was reporting to, and I told him, "Hey, this is not working. I'm working 24/7, but this guy is not unhappy. He's unhappy right now, and he says he's going to talk to the director and transfer me or take me away from brand management." So he said, "Don't worry, I will talk to the director." He walked up to the director's office and told him, "This is not right. We are unnecessarily putting pulls and pressures on Shiv. He's been working so hard for both of us, and because of our egos, like, he's getting quashed in the middle." And believe it or not, before my second boss landed in Calcutta, the director had issued a circular saying that I will no longer report to that boss who was on the flight to Calcutta. I will continue my job doing this way, etc. That was just amazing, absolutely amazing. Before the end of the day, they had resolved it for me. And I was ever grateful to the company that, they took such good care of me. A junior manager, when he came and said, "Hey, I'm being unnecessarily penalized by a senior manager." In Nokia, we had the BL5C crisis, an absolute disaster. August 14th, 2007. I remember that day very well. And then we were issuing an advisory saying that, some X number of batteries had bulged in a production quantity of millions. But the Indian media went to town. They said, "There's a bomb in your pocket. You can't trust Nokia, this, that, etc." Absolute crisis. We pulled it together, and within 48 hours, we'd done a lot of 10 things we said we would do. We engaged with the ecosystem, resolved the crisis, everything. And sure enough, there was a silver lining. Next year, Nokia became India's most trusted brand because of the way we handled that crisis. Okay, it took a lot out of all of us, the team and all of us who did it. And then Nokia stayed number 1 for the next 4 years. It was the first time a technology brand was breaking into the top 10 brands in India. It had never happened. Okay, so that was an absolute crisis on our hands. Okay, we knew it was going to come because the moment we announced, product recall, we knew that the Indian media will not understand the concept of a product recall. PepsiCo, we were sponsoring the IPL. The IPL was hit by match fixing, etc. There was lots of commentary saying, "Why is PepsiCo supporting IPL? They should get out of it," etc. And so Indra, my boss, decided to say that we will walk out of IPL. We had 2 more years of the contract. We had a bank guarantee with BCCI saying we'll be there for all 5 years. So Indra decided to take a write-off of $28 million, which was for the 4th and final year. And she said, "I'm taking this write-off, see what you can do." So I went to Anurag Thakur's residence in Delhi and said, "Hey, we want to withdraw." He said, "Shiv, I don't think this is the time for you to withdraw, but I understand your sentiment." Right. Just to ensure that our bank guarantee was safe, we wanted to take some action in court saying the reputation of the brand is being impacted. So then while I was on the car, Sundar, who was the CEO of IPL, Shashank Manohar, who was the ICC chairman, they called me and said, "Hey, Shiv, what are you doing? Well, aren't we friends?" Sundar knew me for 25 years. He said, "Aren't we friends? Let's talk about this. Why do you want to do that?" So luckily for us, the case didn't come up in the Bombay High Court that day. And Shashank Manohar told me, "Shiv, I guarantee you that your bank guarantee is safe. Nothing will happen. I just want you to stay. We will get a new sponsor, hand over properly, and let's do it right." My lawyers in PepsiCo, both in India and in America, said, "Shiv, don't trust anybody. You're doing this at your risk." I said, "I will take that risk." When the chairman of BCCI and ICC and my good friend Sundar tell me, "You are safe. You have to trust your friends." So I trusted my friends against company advice. Okay. And I said, okay, we'll withdraw the case. I trust you guys to do the right thing. They did the right thing. Absolutely went well. PepsiCo then sponsored the cricket, one day cricket as well as test matches. It ended well for BCCI. It ended well for IPL. It ended well for Anurag Thakur. It ended well for Nokia, for PepsiCo. It ended well for me, everybody. But it was a crisis. And I went against all advice of the lawyers, both in India and USA, saying that I was on my own. They said, if you take this decision, Shiv, you have to bear the consequences. I said, I'm okay. If it goes wrong, what will happen? You'll sack me, right? I'm okay. But somebody has given me a word, I will trust it. Okay, so that's what happened. So these are 3 personal examples. Each of these, you never know it's going to come at you, but it just happens. And you just need to deal with it. So I've given you examples, 2 from my CEO days and 1 from when I was a very junior brand manager. Next slide, please. So if you look at the lessons, what I pick out of this, the first thing is you need to recognize you're in a crisis. Many leaders are spinning all the time. They don't want to recognize they're in a crisis. If you don't recognize that you're in a crisis, you'll never be able to address it. Second, frame the issues. What are the issues in this crisis? And how are you going to resolve them? Frame them. Third, lead from the front. Be visible. Take it on your chin. Take it on your chest. 4, communicate non-stop to all stakeholders. In the BL5C crisis, I was doing press briefing almost every day. That was the only time in my career I've been on Arnab's show. At that time he was at Times Now, and he did it via video link in my office saying, what the hell is happening? Can you brief us on this Nokia crisis? Then always tell the truth. This is something that people will tell you. When you're in a crisis, tell the truth. The moment you don't tell the truth, then people will continue to tease you out, and like an onion, they'll peel you one by one to say, come to the truth. And 6th is very important. You need to be realistic about the crisis, but you need to be idealistic in shooting for the answer and the benefit from the crisis. And finally, remember, it's not about you. Don't say, why has this happened to me on my watch? I was going fine as a CEO. I was going fine as the country's leader or whatever. It is about the institution. You represent an institution. You don't represent yourself. Okay, and that is what is a big lesson in crisis. Always do what's right for the institution. Next chart, please. So this is my book. It's called The Right Choice. It's gone on pre-order on Jan 15th. It'll be available physically on Feb 15th. If you want to order it, you can order it both on Kindle as well as pre-order. The book will be delivered to you between 15th and 18th. It's already on the bestseller list. So please do, go ahead and order it. Okay, it'd be a pleasure for me to have you read this and send me any feedback that you might have about this book, and really look forward to that. Next chart, please. So in summary, a crisis is something that affects your equilibrium or stability or whatever you want to call it. As a leader, sometimes you inherit a crisis. Sometimes you know a crisis is brewing, and sometimes it just comes from left field. I've given you 6 examples of leadership which has gone through a crisis. I started with Mr. Narasimha Rao, our Prime Minister in 1991, an absolute economic crisis. And he took all the right decisions with his team to see where we are today. India would never be here today but for his team and what the vision they had. The second example I spoke to you about was Steve Jobs. When he came back to Apple in 2000, he clearly recognized that selling computers was not going to be it. He had to redefine the business, and he had to transform the company. And they took one industry at a time and did that. The third example I gave you was Gene Kranz. A failure on Apollo 13 leads to a problem. And he says failure is not an option. He's the manager who said tough and competent managers are the kind of people you need. And he defines success as bringing Apollo 13 back to Earth with all 3 astronauts alive. He says that is success for me, nothing less. Then I talked of Captain Sully Sullenberger, where a bunch of Canadian geese just get sucked into his engines of Flight 1549, and within 60 seconds, he has no power. He has to glide his way to safety. He can't reach New York back. He can't reach Teterboro, and he lands in water, and he saves everyone. That's a crisis of a very different, magnitude. And he had all of 1 minute 42 seconds to do this. Imagine. I'm telling you the story. It's taken me more than 1 minute 42 seconds. But he had just 1 minute 42 seconds to resolve that crisis. Not 1 year. It's not like Mr. Narasimha Rao had 10 years to resolve the crisis, right? But here he had 1 minute 42 seconds. Loss of lives. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer inherited a problem in Manchester United. Knows the job he's getting into. knows that nothing less than success is expected of him, but he still takes the job. He was appointed as interim manager. Now he's final manager. He's number 2 on the leaderboard today. He will get there. Okay. And if he does not do well this year, I believe he will lose his job. That's the price of leadership in a crisis. Then I talked of Kevin Johnson, who addressed the issue of Starbucks and racial injustice in a Starbucks outlet by publicly apologizing for it, by not throwing his store manager of that outlet under the bus, by training his people on how to handle these diverse challenges. And then I talked about my personal examples from Unilever, Nokia, and PepsiCo. So that's all I had to say, ladies and gentlemen of IIM Nagpur. Thank you very much. More than happy to accept your questions now.
Thank you, sir.
I finished 2 minutes ahead of schedule, Dr. Maitri.
Thank you, sir, for those informative words. The floor is now open to the audience for questions. Anyone who has questions is requested to add that to the chat box, and we will take it up accordingly. So we have our first question from Dimpy. She asks, how is the present government showing leadership to get the country out of the current economic crisis? And what are your views on steps like completing disinvestment this year, commitment to national infrastructure, and so on? And how do you think they will augment quick recovery?
2 things. If you look at the Indian economy, the Indian GDP is very different in its nature compared to others. If you look at the structure of our economy, we are about 55% services, about 27-28% industry, and about 14-15% agriculture. In agriculture, while it's 14-15%, it accounts for 43% of our employment. So it's still a very important chunk. Okay. And mechanization of agriculture is very difficult because land holdings are very small. If you look at the composition of India's GDP, number 1 is private consumption, which is 65% plus. Next is capital investment. So the government needs to drive these 2. That's exactly what they're trying to do, to ensure that we drive consumption, consumers drive consumption, and to ensure that industries set up, new industries, new ventures, okay, new greenfield projects so that they can create jobs. Our biggest challenge is not just the economy. I believe there are allied areas. Our biggest challenge is to stay competitive, quality competitive, price competitive, and our big challenge is to generate at least 10 million jobs a month. I think that is the bigger challenge in front of the economy right now. Next question, please.
Thank you, sir. Navjot asks, often in crisis, it can persist for long periods and lead to multiple changes in management. Is this the right way to deal with such situations? And how do we evaluate the progress being made to avoid hasty decisions?
See, that's a great question. Thank you. See, the catch with the crisis is once you've identified what the issues with the crisis are or the challenge is, people think that once you've identified it, tomorrow morning it will go away. It never goes away. It takes time. It takes a lot of time. A very good example I'll give you is from cricket. The West Indies went to Australia and hammered the living daylights out of Kim Hughes and his team. Okay. And Kim Hughes at the end of the 3rd match cried on public television and said, I'm resigning as captain. That was a huge blow of ego to the Australian male ego. Because for them, their captain is macho, their captain is very important, the second most important person in the country after the Prime Minister. Okay. They have iconic status, the captain of the Australian cricket team. The Australian Cricket Board got together and said, and they gave it to Alan Border and said, Border, you have 5-10 years to rebuild this team. Take your time, but we'll get there. And systematically, Border and gang rebuilt the team. And in 1997 or 1987, when they won the World Cup in Calcutta, that was the turning moment. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. So people know what the answer is. The moment they've identified the answer, they believe that you need to do it. Let's take what Boeing has gone through. A crisis with 737 MAX. They lost their CEO. They lost a number of executives. Okay, now the European Union has given them license to fly the 737 MAX again. Okay, it was a product failure. On the other hand, Boeing, when it had the battery challenge in the Dreamliner, they addressed it much more systematically. Okay, so it takes time. Sometimes some things take time. You just need to see through it. But people might not have the patience, but that's okay. That's their call. You as a leader must do what's right.
Thank you, sir. Chaitali asks, edutech companies like White Hat Junior, etc., have faced a large backlash, mainly because of the way they advertise the benefits of teaching coding to kids. And what would be your advice to people like this enduring such crisis?
I think the great question again, Chaitali. I think the first point is that you need to be socially responsible and accountable for the advertising you create. Okay. I was part of the ASCII. I'm still a part of the ASCII. I was chairman of the ASCII. You cannot put pressure on kids who are 7 and 8 years old to say, hey, you need to learn coding. That's a choice which the parents have to make. And I think by creating a haves versus have nots, I think that itself is wrong in my book. Okay, so that's not fair advertising. And I think you're putting too much pressure on society and too much pressure on kids to do that. So I think this has to, they need much more self-regulation. It has to be an opt-in kind of advertising and not creating this rift. That's what would be my advice.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. So Naveen asks, we see many examples of crisis management at the highest level, but in dynamic and decentralized corporations, how difficult is it to instill or percolate a similar mindset to each employee in the company?
Yeah, so every company has a list of values, like I'm Nagpur has a list of values. So whenever you're in doubt and your boss is not around, the key thing is to follow that values. That's all. The values are the lighthouse for you to be guided, and then you end up taking the right decision. So look at the value. So if the value is integrity, it's honesty, it's customer first, etc., then don't do anything which goes against the value. It's as simple as that. So because we live in a corrupt country, because we live in a dynamic environment, does not mean that you take license in your hands. So suppose you are in a corrupt country in Africa, as an example, and that's what I alluded to. You cannot say, you know what, the dictators of Africa are corrupt, and I as a company must follow the local rules and not the global mandate. That is wrong. I think companies will be held to higher accountability on values and standards. And I think each individual must be held accountable to a higher standard, is all I would say.
Thank you, Sam. So Aniket asks, often in crisis, people are the most affected component of anything. How do you motivate the workforce in the lack or absence of incentives occasionally? And how do you motivate a plant workforce to deliver stretch targets, etc., especially during times of crisis?
Yeah, so you see, a crisis is a rallying cry. Remember that. A crisis is a situation when you need all hands on the deck. You need to appeal to people's emotions and not just rational emotions. You need to appeal to them for the higher purpose of the organization as to what's in it for all of them rescuing the company. So when we had the challenge with the BL5C crisis, we went to the Indian Cellular Association, Pankaj Mahendru. We roped him in. We went to the Battery Association. We roped them in. We roped in the Scientific Association and scientists who argued our case. So we systematically built a coalition. So when people in your company see that other people are also supporting your cause and other people are also invested in your well-being, they also recognize that they need to be invested. So there's no substitute to being authentic. There's no substitute to being honest. There's no substitute to actually saying, this is a crisis which impacts all of us. It's 0 or 100. Either all 100 of us survive or none survives. Okay, that's how you must always frame a crisis.
Thank you, sir. Krish asks, sir, considering your long career, you must have seen leaders from different generations. What is one quality that leaders of today lack and should be working on? And what is one quality that positively differentiates them from leaders of the past?
I'd say if you look at the leaders of today, okay, the biggest challenge I have with leaders of today is that they just don't know their people. They don't invest time and effort. A CEO does not know beyond his direct reports. Okay, he just doesn't. Okay, today technology allows you to be connected with everybody. I'm connected with all the people who work for me on WhatsApp. Okay, and I message them, I check with them, I be in touch with them, etc. And I invest in them. Sometimes you need to challenge them. My strategy team, one of the teams I lead, I really challenge them, hit them on the head to get better, because you need to invest time and energy to make people better. That is not something that I'm seeing today. People blame lack of time. People blame operations. People are completely lost in today's situation. Okay, that's something I would really want them to focus much more on training their employees and looking long term. The advantage of today's leadership is I think everybody is technologically savvy. Okay, that's an advantage. But are you using technology to the fullest advantage would be the challenge.
Thank you, sir. Saurabh asks, so sustainability has become core to business strategies of many organizations. How can managers leverage sustainability principles to navigate the organizations through a crisis?
Yeah, so sustainability has become front and center for some very simple reasons. I think people who are inheriting the planet, people who are in the 16 to 30 age group, like people such as yourself, are saying, hey, I need to live in a better world. Okay, I can't afford for the world to be denuded. I cannot breathe. I cannot afford my children to breathe, end up with breathing problems, this, that, etc. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second is, if you look at consumers are saying we can tell something to the government, but the government does not listen. Governments don't do anything across the world. They're too late and too slow. But I can hold corporations accountable. If a corporation is accountable and it follows sustainability, then I'll give them my business. So that's what they're saying. So it's a double whammy. And I think you have no choice but to publish your sustainability goals and consistently set the bar high and go on that path. That's the only answer for every company.
Thank you, sir. Chinmoy asks, sir, in the context of the example you gave about Manchester United, trust of any organization is very important during a crisis. And as a leader, how is a person supposed to win the trust of the organization while handling the crisis? You might have covered a bit in the crisis is a rallying cry part, but is there anything else you would like to elaborate on this?
Yeah, sure. See, in a team sport, especially in a team sport like football, where each guy is a superstar, Alex Ferguson used to say this. He would say before every important match, in the previous 48 hours before every important match, he would talk to each player separately, 10, 15 minutes, 3, 4 times in the last 48 hours, telling him what's your role, why is this match important, etc. So you cannot just end up saying, what, football, this is an important match, let's go and win. It doesn't work like that. You have to invoke the personal commitment out of each of your stars in order to do that. And that's exactly what, would be expected of Solskjaer.
Thank you, sir. I think due to a time paucity, we would not be able to take any more
Absolutely.
questions and would like to conclude the session, sir. So there are a couple of things that you've mentioned which I think will stick with us for a long time. One is good leaders are tough and competent, tell the truth, and be realistic about a crisis, idealistic in shooting for the answer. And a crisis is a rallying cry. And I think these are things that we would hope to hold close to our hearts at any time in the future. Thank you, sir, for these informative words and inspiring words. And coming from an eminent leader and mentor like yourself, I'm sure they will resonate with each and every member of the audience. On behalf of the IIM Nagpur student fraternity, I take this opportunity to express our sincere gratitude to you, sir, for taking the time out of your very busy schedule and for gracing this event with your presence. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the tree. That's a lovely gesture. One of the wonderful gestures, very kind of you. Thank you, Dr. Mitri, for inviting me. It's a pleasure doing this for you. All the very best, guys. You might be 6 years old, but your wisdom is 60 years old. Do well wherever you are.
Thank you, sir. We will now have a short break and will reconvene for the next session at 11:15. Thank you.
Okay. Hello. Hello.